Welcome everyone to Rules Explained. In this episode, we are going over Dungeon Crawl Classic. This is episode 2. We're going to be starting on skills. I'm John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nothing.
And let's get started. All right, we left off with skills. This is a huge chapter. I say
Oh my, look at this. Massive.
sarcastically. Here's our awesome picture. Okay, so if I remember correctly, our character generation consisted of our stats. 1 through 6, we assign them. We choose an occupation, and we get our skills, and we're done.
Yeah, and your skills are determined by your occupation, so there won't be any skill choices. You're not going to go ahead and fill up skill slots. There's nothing to choose here. It is a very streamlined system. There's a certain degree of elegance to something this simple because it assumes that the players understand the concept of role playing and how their characters can use their backgrounds and their occupations in creative ways. So, for example, if I'm a blacksmith, I could probably go ahead and justify the following. I can identify the quality of a weapon. I could go ahead and make a weapon, or a horseshoe, or I could go ahead and determine if this particular furnace has been used in a certain number of years or days. I might even convince my game master that I can speak a certain blacksmith lingo, and I could go ahead and communicate subtle facts without anybody else knowing what the heck I'm talking about. So it's so flexible and so open-ended that as long as the player is using good role-playing descriptors and the GM has got some good sense of ability to work on the fly, you don't have skill lists, you just do it.
Cool. So we have making a skill check. So it looks like we have a difficulty challenge, a DC.
Yep.
A player rolls a 1d20.
Or a 1d10 if they're not skilled or
Oh,
trained.
okay. That's cool. So if you're skilled in it, you're rolling a d20, and I'm assuming you're adding something to it.
Yes, if the referee agrees, you can add your intelligence bonus or your agility bonus or whatever the case may be, depending on what you're trying to do.
Well, that's interesting. So if you're skilled in it, you're rolling a d10. If you're unskilled, I'm sorry, if you're skilled in it, you're rolling a d20. If you're unskilled,
Yes.
you're rolling a d10. Oh, okay. And then we have your different difficulty levels.
Oh, and by the way, we're really quickly, those skills by occupation also apply to your character class. So you could go ahead and use the same rationale for wizards, like if you're trying to, look at an old tome, like the example shows, or if you're a warrior trying to go ahead and determine the allegiance of a certain heraldic symbol. So it's very open-ended. Sorry, go ahead.
No, okay, that's interesting. So it's not very specific. It's just kind of open to interpretation.
Yes.
I like that. I like that a lot. So
Oh, it's
difficulty
awesome.
levels, we have 10, 15, and 20.
5, 10,
Oh,
15.
5, 10, 15, 20. Okay, yeah,
Oh
wow.
my gosh, don't forget the 5.
You gotta have the 5. Tasks are child's play. DC 10, tasks are a man's deed. DC 15, tasks are feats of daring do.
Daring do.
Daring do. Never thought I would use that word ever. DC 20, tasks are a hero's work. And that's it. I mean, it really doesn't go past 20, does it?
Now, as the referee, if I decide that this is an extraordinarily, incredibly unlikely thing to be accomplished, I could, in all likelihood, give it a 25. If I'm feeling like a total, behind, which is what we say if we're doing a PG broadcast,
Mm-hmm.
I could say difficulty class of 30 just to discourage you from rolling, but that's when somebody will roll a 20 and then make your life miserable.
Yeah. So opposed skill checks. So the best example of an opposed skill check I can think of is a person is sneaking and a person is like on guard looking for somebody.
Yep.
So how are opposed skill checks done?
Each one of you rolls a d20. You add in the appropriate modifier, probably intelligence if I'm the one looking, and probably agility if I'm the one sneaking. And whoever rolls the highest is the winner.
Simple.
Done.
Well, that takes us past skills.
One, yeah,
Now,
one quick thing. It says when not to make a skill check. I like this part. It says, hey, if it moves the action along and if it's not extraordinarily critical for the drama or for the overall story, let it go. The referee is encouraged, the GM is encouraged. Hey, if the player has that smart to go ahead and ask a question, and their character is skilled in that particular situation, give them the information. If it moves the story along in a nice way, and makes the characters and player, or I should say the players, feel like they're accomplishing something.
For example, I hate to put you on the spot, but like for example, so it's more story based than it would be dice rolling based.
Yeah, this is a very strange game. I mean, when we start talking about combat and spells, there are dice rolls everywhere for every circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the game seems to be making a conceit that says, when you're not in combat or casting a lot of spells, let this story, let the story flow. Let the players take control. Instead of just the dice. And I think that, I don't know if that's a conscious decision on the part of the designers of this game, or if it just so happened to be karma coming back at them, because
Mm-hmm.
if there's so much randomness in critical hits and fumbles and spell casting and corruption and all those other things, wouldn't it be nice if there were a few things I could control as a player, like when I want to go ahead and look for something, or when I want to go ahead and decipher a map or whatever, just to make it a little bit less random, I suppose. So is this a conceit on the part of the game designers, or a happy accident? Let's ask Bob Ross.
We could. It's a okay. So now we're moving on to equipment. So chapter 3, we've got skills now. We have equipment. We have a very cool library here of assortments of armor and weapons.
Again, the illustrations are so retro, it's amazing. It's
It
so much
is.
fun.
Yeah, I was completely fooled on this. I did not know that. I'm still surprised that this, just came out like 10, 12 years ago. I could have sworn
Yeah.
this is something from the 70s or 80s. So, starting gold, your different classes. Here's your dwarf class, your halfling class, your elven class.
Yeah.
And you get your starting silver pieces. So it looks like if you wanted to, you could start a character at level 2 or 3. They've got rules in here for this.
Yes, if you wanted to, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, because as I said before, and which will become more clear later on, I've never seen a campaign in which the characters actually live this long if you actually start them at level 0. Um, it is possible. There are a wide variety of ways you could do it, but my goodness sakes, this game is designed for carnage on the maximum level.
And it looks like the currency is your standard copper, silver, gold piece, platinum, and it's all a 10 to 1. Pretty
Yep.
simple. Encumbrance. A character
Yeah,
who
whatever.
carries too much weight. Okay, moving on. The fumble
Yeah,
die.
no, I mean, that's literally the rule, is that if it looks like it's going to weigh them down, penalize them some movement. If it doesn't look like it's going to weigh them down, don't worry about it then.
So if I'm carrying 3 full suits of plate mail, it's probably going to wear me down a bit.
Yes.
What's
Funny you
this?
should mention armor,
Uh huh.
because you were just about to ask me about the fumble die, weren't
I
you?
I was about to.
Now, here is something interesting. When you roll a 1 in combat, you fumbled.
Okay.
And the severity of that fumble is another die roll. Again, I was just mentioning that the obsession with this game with dice. And that die type is dependent on your armor. So the heavier armor that you wear, the worse your fumble will be,
Hmm. That's kind of cool.
potentially. I mean, you can always roll a 1 and get away with it, but I mean, if you roll a 20 while you're wearing your heavier armor, that could be bad.
That could be bad. All right. Weapons. A battle axe, damage 1d10, range dash, costing gold piece 7. Seems pretty standard stuff. We have range, looks like short, medium, long, I'm presuming.
Yep.
Is there a. I see there's a couple asterisks after it.
Yep. It's basically telling you about strength modifiers for certain weapons at short range.
Mm-hmm.
Notice again the damages. Here's where the funny dice come into play. You can roll a D3, you can roll a D5, you can roll a D7.
D5.
Yep.
That kills me. See a D4, D8, typical stuff.
People who appreciate the old first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons will appreciate the humorous cartoons interspersed through the rulebook.
I was just glancing at that. That's funny. And then we have ammunition. More equipment.
Very exhaustive equipment list.
Yeah, all 24 items of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mounts and related gear. All right. And then we move into combat. So it's interesting that they gave us equipment and then combat, not here's combat and then equipment. So it kind of gives you an idea of what you're holding. I'm holding a sword, a staff,
Yes.
you know.
And now we're going to get into the rules of the game. I mean, this is all just character creation and all that. Now we're getting the actual, how do you go ahead and run this thing?
All right. Timekeeping, basics of encounters. Okay, so run me through a typical combat round.
Well, in short, you roll initiative,
How?
and the initiative is going to go ahead and depend on all sorts of different things,
All right.
including your character class and so on and so forth. But in essence, 1d20 is going to be your initiative roll. So, what? Okay, let me kind of backtrack a little bit. This is a retro feel, but with modern mechanics. When these games started coming out after the 1990s and into the 21st century, there was a feeling to go ahead and simplify game mechanics. And even though, again, it's retro, they've avoided all the different types of dice and all the different types of, well, dice for most mechanics. Let me rephrase that. For example, there used to be a D6 for initiative, and then you'd roll a 2d6 for turning undead, and so on and so forth. Most game mechanics that are check related are usually resolved with a D20. Usually, DCC does add a few things in there where you could be rolling a D10 or a D24 or a D30 and so on and so forth. But in essence, D20s are the main dice that are used. So yes, you roll for initiative using the D20. All right.
Okay.
Then you go ahead and conduct your actions. And actions are very simple. You get one action and a movement. All right. And that's essentially it. Now, there are exceptions that depending on your character level and your character class. You might get multiple actions. Your attack actions could be a hand or it could be a missile weapon, or if you're a spellcaster, it could be one of those. And you just trade blows until one side gives up, or one side runs away, or one side dies. And that's about as simple as it can possibly be.
So it's initiative. Okay, here's the actions. Okay, so typically a character or NPC has two actions. It sounds like I can either move or do an action. Like
We
open
can
a
move
door,
Oh,
uncork.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Those
Types.
are things you can do in place of attacking.
Okay. Then armor class. Armor class is determined by armor shield. So how's armor class determined?
Like in most modern games, it is an ascending system. So you start with your base, usually of 10, and you add armor, which increases your armor class, which is now your target number to hit.
I was gonna say then that becomes the difficulty challenge that the attacker's trying to overcome.
That is correct. And as you can see, there are modifiers, which doesn't seem too unusual until you look at the types of modifiers. Here's where the system gets wonky, and this is what its appeal is to many people. Yes, I have a +2 or a -2. That's good. But I may also have a die step penalty. That's what that -1d means. That means I would actually lose a die step, and I have to go down to the next die type
Oh,
to
okay.
make my attack.
So instead of rolling a
Okay,
d20, I'd end up rolling a d15 or something.
14.
14.
D14. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So then you go down to the D, and you just go. You keep going down steps. As a matter of fact, the step progression is back in the beginning of the book, just to go ahead and remind everybody of how the steps work.
And then here's the fumbles that you were talking about, depending upon the type of armor you're wearing.
By the way, I made a slight mistake. If you lost a step, it would be down to a D16.
Okay. So it's 20,
Yes.
16, 14, 10.
Yes. No 12. So it goes 20, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. And then going up, it goes from 20, goes 24, D30.
Wow. Hate to be the guy that had to design the D30 die.
Well, all you have to do is talk to Lou Zoki, or Zochi if you wish. He is probably one of the more famous people of all gaming. He is, I mean, second probably only to Gary Gygax if you're one of those people who've been paying attention to the history of games and the evolution of games. He is one of the people who's created all sorts of different dice. He has a D100. He has
I've seen
D30s.
those.
Yeah,
They roll a really long time.
Yes, they do. And he was the one of the people who helped bring these different types of die systems into play because people were just fascinated with the possibilities of being able to use die steps instead of just relying on the standard polyhedrals.
Hmm. And here's the different types of fumbles. Okay, so you're rolling a d20, it looks like, for a fumble.
Only if you're wearing the absolute heaviest of armors.
Oh,
Like
okay, okay, okay.
if you take a look back at the equipment list, it'll tell
Yep.
you the armor die roll that you will use for the fumble when you roll it.
Okay, so if you're
Um,
wearing heavy, it's a d16. If you're rolling
right.
moderate armor, it's a d12. Light armor
Yep.
is a d8. No armor is a d4, and I'm assuming that these progressively get worse
Yes.
the higher the number. Okay, that's kind of
And some
cool.
of them aren't too bad. It make kind of sense in combat, breaking weapons, tripping over things, and so on and so forth. Um, but
Your
some of them
axe,
are like,
your axe falling off the handle.
yes, you can even hit yourself if things don't go right.
I was gonna say, we play Pathfinder, and you guys hate the fumble deck.
Oh, despise the fumble deck.
Despite, but yet here's a table on it.
Yes, and it kind of, it is it. Here's my personal editorial comment on fumble charts.
Mm-hmm.
If you're playing a game that is heroic in nature and that wants to emphasize the story, I think fumble charts are and fumble rules beyond losing your attack and perhaps a minor issue. I think those detract from the game. If you're playing a game that is full of chaos like Dungeon Crawl Classics, okay, fine. You use the fumble charts. Pathfinder has always intrigued me. They want to go ahead and be realistic, I think, but I believe in some cases the fumble charts kind of detract away from the narrative. But that's just my personal opinion, and perhaps because I've had one too many fumbles when I played Pathfinder,
A little bit jaded.
maybe perhaps.
Critical hits, though. Rolling a
Oh my.
natural 20 is a critical hit. What's a critical hit do?
Well, why don't you go ahead and scroll down because there are multiple critical
Oh
hit
my
tables.
gosh.
Yes, if you've played Rollmaster, you're like, oh, this is nothing. But if you've never played a game like Rollmaster before, you're probably like, what in the heck are there five different critical tables for? Well, ask Joseph Goodman. But the short form that I can go ahead and suggest is it gives a variety for combat and makes it very visceral. I mean, you got all sorts of really crazy things happening here, and yes, your characters can lose limbs like you see there, not just in an abstract way, but they can lose them during combat, and your characters can be scarred permanently. The level in which I'm sorry, the table that you use is dependent sometimes on your level, but more actually dependent on your class, which makes the warriors, if you go down to your tables there for warriors, as warriors progress, they become more and more deadly with their critical hits.
Okay, so here we have table 1, which is for all 0 level characters and all
Yes.
wizards.
Yep. Wizards are never going to be good at crit.
Our next one is all thieves and elves.
Yep.
Then we have clerics, halflings, levels 1 to 2, warriors and level 1 to 3 dwarves. Okay. Then we
Now,
have
there's something very interesting that I find a bit well, I find this a bit of a bit problematic. If you take a look at result 24 on critical table 5, it says strike severs weapon arm. And this is for a level 5 warrior. You go back now to the elf table for thieves and elves. The roll of 24, strike through the heart, 3d6 damage additional, and save versus death. And
dead.
I understand, the critical die that you use could indeed change and is actually more difficult to get that 24, but it just seems to me a bit, imbalanced for a huge warrior like that not to have a little bit more of a chance of getting that killing blow in right away.
Mm-hmm.
Again, somebody call me out on this. Somebody say, well, you didn't look at the critical tables in the character generation section and so forth careful enough. I think I still going to stand by what I say.
Mounted combat. So riding a horse, doing
Yep.
jousting, shooting an arrow from a horse, swinging a sword. Then we have mighty deeds of arms.
Yes, this is a fighter's dream. And in the original games of Dungeons and Dragons, a
Oops.
fighter's only advantage was being able to use all the different weapons and all the different armors. In this game, fighters are loaded. And you might recognize this if you're a player of something like Pathfinder or third edition or even, fifth or fourth edition, giving the fighters these various types of options and combat maneuvers to go ahead and make a fighter's job more interesting and more varied.
Hmm. Types of deeds. It's like blinding attacks, disarming attacks, pushbacks, precision shots. Again, adding to the narrative of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Rallying maneuvers, defensive weapons, damage, and death.
Okay, character dies at 0
Dead.
and
Not
is
coming back.
bleeding out. Well, this is where I'm going to get some pushback from DCC fans if they're out there listening. They're first going to push back on the whole critical thing, and they're going to point out all the different variations on critical die types and so on and so forth. And I get that. Um, but this is where the other thing is going to happen is when I said earlier that death is frequent, you can't advance in levels. Well, here are some ways that you could argue that I'm not correct. First off, bleeding out. For each character level you possess, you can survive one round while at 0 hit points, and if somebody can get to you and heal you, you'll survive.
Oh, I kind of like that.
It's not too bad of a rule. It's very simple. You don't have to worry about negative hit points. You don't have to keep track of death saving throws. It's just, count 1, 2, 3. And if it exceeds your level, you're done.
You're dead.
Okay? If it exceeds your level, you're done. The other issue, and this one is in some ways almost controversial, recovering the body. If I've read this rule right, and I have tried to go ahead and look at it carefully on numerous occasions, um, if you can go ahead and find somebody who's died and within 1 hour roll that body over essentially and kind of like perform basic first aid, that person gets a luck check. And if they survive, they're conscious and alive, but not functional in any way, shape, or form.
Uh huh.
And then they got some permanent injury. So I've used this before in my D&D games to go ahead and make this possible where characters have that chance and they get permanent ability score loss. But this one just seems almost too easy in a way.
It is
Just
kind of the
within
easy
one
mode.
hour. Yeah. So it almost makes the bleeding out thing almost inconsequential. Of course, the bleeding out thing, if you heal somebody, you can bring them back to a fairly decent situation, but they'll have something going on. But I don't know. The recovering of the body just seems a bit too easy in a way.
Yeah, it is. It's
That's
like
just me.
45 minutes after death. Yeah, just roll him over. He's good to go.
Yeah,
We have
rub some
healing,
dirt in it.
saving throws, morale, 2 weapon attacks. I always like 2 weapon attacks. Burning luck.
Oh,
That sounds
yeah, luck.
important.
Yes, it is. This is one way you can go ahead and make your life easier. You have a luck stat, and if you decide to go ahead and burn luck points, you can go ahead and modify your dice rolls. And much like Karma from the Marvel Superheroes role playing game, you can decide whether or not to use that luck before or after a roll to modify it to your desires. You can modify it to maybe even get a critical if you have a certain critical threat range. And you can modify it to avoid a fumble and so on and so forth. The problem with luck, though, is it doesn't recover like normally other abilities do. The only thing you can hope for is depending on character class, or the referee can award you luck. And how do you get awarded luck? By following your alignment, by following your character class, good role playing. It's much like hero points, perhaps, in
Hmm.
Pathfinder.
A way to reward the character for good role playing and storytelling and things like
Yes,
that. That's cool.
exactly.
I like it. Other
The
combat.
caveat is though is you can never have more luck than you started with
Okay,
in
so
a
there
character
is
sheet.
a high watermark.
Yes. So if I
Gotcha.
roll my character has an 8 luck, I will never have more than 8 luck in my lifetime unless there's some sort of magical luck stone that gives me extra luck or whatever.
You've just made a new magical item. Turning unholy. More tables. We have turn undead. Turn unholy.
Yes. Remember, if you're a cleric, depending on your alignment, what is unholy to you is different. And this is what you do. You roll and you find out who actually gets turned, what actually happens to them. You can kill off a whole bunch of them. This is a fairly standard turning undead chart, just modified to represent the fact that what is the anathema to one cleric is a friend to another.
Gotcha. And then spell duels. That sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a fairly complex rule, a series of rules to go ahead and allow spellcasters to engage in these very fantastical, you know, um, spell contests without relying on just whoever won the initiative to see who wins. And it gets a little bit more tactical. There's a little bit more decision making to be made rather than just luck to the dice roll. And again, if I could just go ahead and keep dropping the names of games, I think they had War of the Wizards in mind. That was an old TSR game set in the Empire of the Petal Throne universe that they were trying to go and emulate here.
Hmm. And the opposed spells. More charts.
Get more charts.
More charts. Spells druid. Check comparisons. So they're going at it. Counter spells.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
With pictures. Okay. Magic. Why don't
Yes.
we pause here? Because we're starting to run out of time.
Which is a good thing to pause because if anybody happens to be looking at their own copy of the rule book or just wants to know a little quick thing here, Chapter 5 is magic. Chapter 5 starts somewhere around page 104 and goes on to page 303.
Wow.
Yes, this is the meat of the game. Everything revolves around this magic for whatever reason. In fact, there's more magic than there are monsters, and I'll explain that the next time we get together.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for listening. Again, you can always find us on YouTube. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts and Podbean. As always, I'm John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nothing.
Guys, thank you for listening.